Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram And Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of the upcoming mains exam. In the first article, we'll talk about the importance, issues and the way forward with respect to the parliamentary committees in India. In the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the status of public health expenditure in India and the way forward. In the third article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the serious concern of tribal vulnerability. In the fourth article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the Coffee Board of India. Finally, in the fifth article, we'll talk about the Central Drug Standards Control Organization and the Drug Controller General of India. Then, in the prelims snippet section, we'll have a discussion with respect to some of the very important topics for the preliminary exam. Now, the very first topic is about the parliamentary committees. Now, after the government introduced the Waqf Amendment Bill, there were a lot of controversies, and that made the government to refer this particular bill to the Joint Committee of the Parliament. Now, we'll see what this construct of parliamentary committees is all about, what is the importance of this, and what are the issues plaguing the parliamentary committees, and what should be the way forward. Now, this is with respect to GS2 Indian Constitution features and the Parliament structure and functioning. Now, before we talk about the parliamentary committees, we all know that the Parliament of India is the supreme law-making body in the country, and it is vested with a lot of authority and powers, right? And this makes it to carry out a lot of functions, and these functions are varied, they are complex, and they are voluminous, right? Now, moreover, what we see is that the Parliament does not have the adequate capacity, adequate time, or adequate expertise to carry out the tasks, that is, to scrutinize different bills. And therefore, there lies the need of having a particular body which can do these tasks and reduce the burden of the Parliament. There comes the importance of parliamentary committees in India. Now, these parliamentary committees, if you just want to define it, what are these parliamentary committees? So these are the committees of MPs who are either elected or appointed by the respective house or are nominated by the chair of that house, either by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha or by the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha, right? Now, what we need to keep in mind is that these committees, they work under the overall supervision of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha or the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha. Again, the origin of these parliamentary committees goes back to the British parliamentary system, right? So just remember that. Now, what we see is that we have Article 105 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about the powers and privileges of the House, of its members and of its committees. And then we also have Article 118, which talks about giving Parliament the power to frame its rules of procedures and the conduct of the business. So according to these two articles, we have the formation of the parliamentary committees. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that the Constitution of India mentions these committees at different places, but it does not talk about the composition or the tenure or the functioning of these committees, right? And it is vested with the individual house, the respective house. Now, how we can classify these parliamentary committees? See, primarily, the parliamentary committees are of two types. One is the standing committee and the other is ad hoc committees. Now, these standing committees, as the name says, these are of permanent nature, right? They are constituted annually or periodically, and they have a specific task to do. Then what we have is ad hoc committee. As the name says, that these committees are temporary in nature. They are set up for a specific purpose, and after the purpose is completed, they are then disbanded. Now, if we go into the details of these standing committees, first we have got the financial committees. So for example, we have got the Public Accounts Committee. Now, we all know that this Public Accounts Committee, it consists of 22 members, right? And these 22 members, out of this, 15 are elected from the Lok Sabha and 7 are elected from the Rajya Sabha. Now, how they're elected? They're elected through the proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. Now, before we go to the next committee, can you just tell me that who presides as the chairman of this Public Accounts Committee, right? So just let me know in the comment section. Now, the mandate of this committee is to examine the reports, the CAG reports, right? Then we have got the Estimates Committee. Now, this committee consists of 30 members. Now, all the members of this committee, they are actually elected from the Lok Sabha through the proportional representation by means of single transferable vote, right? And then what we see is that the mandate of this committee is to examine the estimates of the budget. Then we have got the Public Undertakings Committee. Again, this committee consists of 22 members. That is 15 are elected from the Lok Sabha and 7 are from Rajya Sabha. And what we need to keep in mind is that yes, they are elected through the proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. Now, what this committee does is that it examines the CAG reports with respect to the public undertakings. Then what we see is we have got the departmentally related standing committees, DRSCs. Now see, we have got in total 24 departmentally related standing committees. Now they in all cover the jurisdiction of different ministries and departments of the central government. Next, what we see is that we have in total 31 members of a particular departmentally related standing committees. Now what you need to keep in mind is that in all these 24 DRSCs, we have got 24 DRSCs, 16 are under the overall supervision of the Lok Sabha and 8 are under the overall supervision of the Rajya Sabha. Now, other than these standing committees, we also have the ethics committee, right? We also have committee on government assurance, right? Then we have got committees like business advisory committee, the general purpose committee, right? Now, can you just tell me who heads the general purpose committee, right? Do answer in the comment section. Then we have got the ad hoc committee. As I just said, that these are of temporary in nature. They are set up for a specific purpose. After the purpose is completed, then they are disbanded. Now, primarily, the ad hoc committees are of two types. One is the inquiry committees, right? The task of these committee is to inquire a particular issue and then report to the House, right? Then the second type of committees are, we have advisory committees, right? Now these advisory committees are then can be divided into two subtypes. One, we have got the joint committee, which comprises of members from both the houses of the parliament, and then we have got select committee, right? So as I said, that we have got the Waqf Amendment Bill, which has been referred to a joint committee, right? That is a committee which comprises of members from the two houses. Now let us see what are the powers and functions of these parliamentary committees. The first and foremost is that it reviews and scrutinizes the working of the government. It makes sure whether the government is carrying out its tasks which it has promised or not. It makes sure that the working of the government is according to the law, is according to the constitution. Then it also has the power to summon ministers and officials so that it can testify their arguments, and it can also then follow up with more questions. Then it also examines different kinds of bills, as I just said, that it makes sure that these bills, before they are made as an act, before they are made a law, they conform to the principles of the constitution. They conform to the other laws as well, right? They also make recommendations, and they make sure that the societal evolution is incorporated into these laws. For example, we had this Consumer Protection Act, right? So the Parliamentary Committee, it actually recommended a lot of suggestions so that they can be incorporated in the Consumer Protection Act. And those suggestions were then finally incorporated. And then now we have a particular Consumer Protection Act, which is citizen-centric, that is customer-centric. Next is, what is the significance of these parliamentary committees? The first is expertise and specialization. See, please understand that we have got these parliamentary committees, which comprises of members who are domain experts, who are experts in their particular field, or who have got substantial experience in a particular domain. For example, we have got finance, or we have got foreign affairs, right? Or we have got technology. So the members of these parliamentary committees, they have got substantial knowledge, and through their input, they can make sure that they evolve a more robust legal framework, right? Next is cross-party collaboration. As I just said, that these parliamentary committees, they have got members from different parties. This fosters dialogue among different parties, and it also leads to consensus on decision making. Then we have got, it acts as mini parliament. Now, see, as we discussed in the beginning, that parliament has a lot of tasks to do, right? So such type of research work, or let's say the examination with respect to a particular bill, the scrutinizing of a particular bill, that can be delegated to these committees so that the parliament can actually focus upon some of the more important deliberative aspects, right? So therefore they act as mini parliament. Next, it also offers checks on the government. See, we already know that in a parliamentary form of government, the executive is responsible, is accountable to the parliament, right? Now, the parliamentary committees, as a tool of the parliament, they make sure that they hold the executive accountable for its actions and inactions, both. Next is, they provide a robust legal framework, as we just discussed in the beginning, that they actually recommend those actions, those changes, those amendments to the bill, which are in accordance to the need of the society, which should be there so that we can have a more strengthened legal framework. Next is financial and budgetary oversight. As we started in the beginning, that we have got different financial committees, right? So they make sure that they have got proper analysis of the CAG reports on the expenses of the government. Then we have got different departmentally related standing committees. They also make sure that the demand for grants which are made by the different ministries, they are actually right. They are not arbitrary in nature, right? So these are the significance of the parliamentary committees. Now, what are the issues and challenges pertaining to the parliamentary committees in India? See, first is the poor number of sitting. Just see in this particular chart that we have got the average number of annual sittings in different Lok Sabha. So you just see that in the first Lok Sabha, the average number of sitting was 135 per year. Now it has come down to 55 in the 17th Lok Sabha. So what I'm trying to say is that in all, we have got a reduction in the number of sittings of the parliament, and that obviously has a negative influence on the functioning of the parliamentary committees, right? And next is limited referrals. There has been limited referrals when we talk about the parliamentary committees, when we talk about different bills. Just see, in the 14th Lok Sabha, 60% of the bills were referred to the parliamentary committees. Then in the 15th, 71%. And just see the reduction, the drastic reduction. It is 28% in the 16th Lok Sabha, 16% in the 17th Lok Sabha. So very few referrals are being made to these parliamentary committees, referrals of different bills. So these committees are unable to scrutinize, they're unable to examine this particular bills, right? Next is weakened scrutiny. What we see is that adequate resources are not there with these committees. So therefore, they're unable to perform their tasks, and they are thus performing suboptimally, and that leads to weakened scrutiny of these bills. Next is resource constraints. When we talk about these committees, what we see is that they have a sort of inadequate resource capacity in terms of research staff, in terms of the secretariat facilities, in terms of the other basic amenities, and that obviously has an effect, a negative effect on the parliamentary committees. Then we have got party politics. See, what we see is that different parties are members of these parliamentary committees, but there is a sort of political influence. There is the political influence, and their views are not impartial, and that affects the overall recommendations of these committees, right? So what we need to keep in mind is that, see, party politics is a different thing, but if you are actually analyzing, scrutinizing, or examining a particular bill, that should not be influenced because of the party politics. Next, we have got limited powers to enforce. The sad part is that the recommendations of these parliamentary committees, they are not binding in nature. They are just of recommendatory nature, right? So moreover, what we see is that they do the work of post-mortem analysis. After the activity, after the action has already been taken, then they give their recommendations. So that does not have the adequate effect. Right. Now, what should be the way forward in order to make the whole parliamentary committee functioning more robust? The first is increase in the referral rate. What do we mean by that? There has to be a policy which mandates that different bills, in fact, all the bills, they should go to these parliamentary committees, respective parliamentary committees, for a proper examination, for a proper scrutiny, so that we can actually have more added inputs from these committees, and then they can be incorporated in the final act. Then what we see is there needs to be increase in the resources. So we have got the National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution. In 2002, it recommended that adequate funding should be given to these parliamentary committees, right? Next, there has to be enhancement in the transparency. What we see is that the working of these committees, it should be made public through public hearings or through the publication of reports, right? Next, we should have increase in the member of parliament's participation. Again, you give incentives. We have, if we want, we can even penalize these particular MPs and make sure that they have adequate presence in these committees, so that they can adequately give their views, and make sure that we have got a structure of the parliamentary committees which is more productive in terms of the parliamentary functioning, right? Next, there needs to be enhancement in the independence. What we need to make sure is that the political parties, different parties, they should not influence the functioning of these parliamentary committees. They should not be actually dominated by the government or by different businesses. So what we see is, Parliament, as I said in the beginning, that it has a lot of tasks to do. And parliamentary committees, they're tasked very important things in the parliament. Tasked with very important things. So what we need to keep in mind is that these parliamentary committees, they should be made more robust. They should be given adequate capacity so that they can scrutinize and they can examine the bills and they can also hold the government accountable, whether it's about the financial accountability, whether it's about the administrative accountability, right? So also we have got the 28th US President, Woodrow Wilson. So he also said that the Congress in session is Congress on public display, whereas the Congress in the committee rooms is the Congress at work. Now this signifies the importance of parliamentary committees. So therefore, there is a need to enhance, to reinvigorate the performance or the functioning of these parliamentary committees. Now before we go to the next topic, we have got the mains question. So we have got a 2023 mains previous year's question. It says, examine the structure of parliamentary committee system. How far the financial committees helped in the institutionalization of the Indian Parliament. Next, we have a practice question. So the question says, the weakening of the parliamentary committees tantamounts to weakened parliamentary system of government. Analyze. So do write a particular answer on this question. Now coming to the next article, it is about the public health expenditure. So we have a column in the Indian Express, which is written by the member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council, Economic Advisory Council. Now this particular author stresses upon the fact that because of the government funded healthcare schemes, that especially the healthcare insurance, there has been a reduction in the vulnerability which is faced by the bottom 50% of the population when we talk about the healthcare, right? Now, this is with respect to GSU welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections, development and management of social sector relating to health. So we'll see what is the construct of the public healthcare expenditure in India and what are the issues and what should be the way forward. Now, if we analyze the healthcare setup in the country, we can actually do so at three levels. So the first is that we can start with the primary level. So at the very grassroots lies the primary healthcare setup. Now this comprises of two things. First is the primary healthcare centers, and then you have got the sub healthcare centers. Now this is at the bottommost of the pyramid, and this is then at the next level, which actually covers around 20,000 to 30,000 of the population. Then if we go to the next level, we have got the secondary level. Now this caters to, the first is the community health centers. Now this caters to a population of around 80,000 to 1,20,000 population. And then we have got the sub-district hospitals. Then finally at the tertiary level, we have got the district hospitals, and then it is followed up by the medical colleges, right, which offer super specialty care, right? Now that is what the framework of public healthcare setup in the country is all about. That is the primary level, the secondary level and the tertiary level. Now if we talk about the out-of-pocket expenditure, now what is this out-of-pocket expenditure? Now this is the expenditure which is borne by the individual household for availing a particular health service. And what needs to be kept in mind is that it excludes the protection which is given out of the insurance services, whether be it the private or the public or other social security benefits, right? Then we have got the government healthcare expenditure. Now this can be primarily divided into two fronts. First is the union and that of the states. Now, what we see is that the union contributes to around 34% of the total healthcare expenditure. And then we have the states which contribute to around 66%. Now, in this particular article, what the author tries to stress is that the proportion of the bottom 50% household, that in the year 2011-12, it was 16.8%, right, which had incurred the hospitalization, right? And then it was 21.6% in the year 2022-23. So there has been an increase in the number of households which have incurred the hospitalization. So we see there is an increase. But on the other hand, what we see is that there is a sort of reduction in the overall burden on the households. How? So you just see that there has been a reduction from 10.8%, that is the households with hospitalization expense, that has actually reduced from 10.8% to 9.41%. Now this signifies that there has been a sort of relief provided by the government insurance services, primarily the Ayushman, that is PMJ, right? So that is what the author is trying to convey. Now, in addition to the data which is provided by the author, we also have the data which is provided by the National Health Accounts. So we have got the National Health Accounts. Now, this is provided by the National Health Accounts Resource Center, which is a part of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So what the data says is that there has been a tremendous increase in the government health expenditure. So that has almost increased by 63% in terms of the GDP from the financial year 15 to the financial year 22. It also says that there has been a substantial increase in the government health expenditure from 1.13% in the financial year 15 to 1.84% in the financial year 22. Also, what it stresses upon the fact is that there has been a consistent increase when we talk about the per capita health expenditure which is borne by the government. So there has been a tripling of the per capita government healthcare spending in these years, right? Next, what the data says is that there has been a substantial increase in the investment in the government health insurance scheme. For example, we have got the PMJ, that is Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, Ayushman PMJ. So there has been almost a 4.4 times increase in the investment when it comes to such insurance schemes. Again, the data also gives the fact that there has been a significant reduction when we talk about the out-of-pocket expenditure. So that has almost reduced from 62% to almost 39%. That is in 2015, that is financial year 2015, it was almost 62%. And in the financial year 22, it has reduced to 39%. And you can also just look at this graph. So this graph shows the convergence between the government health expenditure and the out-of-pocket. That is, there has been an increase in the government health expenditure. It has almost reached to 40.6%. And then we have got the out-of-pocket, which has reached to 48%. Now this, we are talking about 2018 and 19 data. Now, what are the factors which have actually contributed towards the lowering of the out-of-pocket expenditure? The first is the schemes like Ayushman Bharat PMJ, that is Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Now, such schemes enable people to actually access different healthcare facilities without having the financial burden, because the financial burden is borne by the insurance agencies. Next, we have got the increased utilization of government facilities. So we have got different state governments which are providing, for example, free ambulances, which are providing almost free healthcare services, free vaccination services to different state of the society. So that is also helping. Next, we have got the Ayushman Arogya Kendras. In some of these kendras, that is Ayushman Arogya Kendras, medicine, essential diagnostics services and medicines are being provided free of cost, right? Next, we have got Jan Aushadhi Kendras. So in these Jan Aushadhi Kendras, what we see is that there is the provision of the generic medicines, and that too at very economical prices. Next, we have got the price regulation of the essential medicines. The government has been in a continuous mode to reduce the price of the essential medicines, so as to make sure that weaker section of the society can easily avail such medicines. Then there has been investments in water supply and sanitation. Now we all know that the government is having numerous schemes, for example, Jal Jeevan Mission, right, or other sanitation, Swachh Bharat Mission. Now such activities, what they do is that they reduce the waterborne illnesses, and thus it also has a positive effect in the overall healthcare outcomes. Then there are investment in the healthcare infrastructure. What we see is that the government has been in the mode of expanding the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, right, or different sort of district hospitals. We have got different state governments which are expanding the sort of range of functions which are performed by the district hospitals. So we have got some of the very important institutes which are being established by the central government, especially the super specialty hospitals. So that is where the investments in the healthcare infrastructure is all about. Now, what are the issues which are plaguing the public healthcare apparatus in the country? The first and foremost is the equity in the access to the healthcare facilities. Now, in this, what we see is that there is a significant regional variation. So just look at this map. You'll see that we have got some states in the country where the government healthcare expenditure as a percentage of the total health expenditure, that is significantly high. For example, we have the states like Himachal Pradesh. On the other hand, what we see is that there are certain states which are having a very low government healthcare expenditure. For example, Uttar Pradesh, or we have Maharashtra. On the other hand, if we talk about the out-of-pocket expenditure as a percentage of total health expenditure, we have got the states like Uttar Pradesh, which are actually bearing a lot of out-of-pocket expenditure, right? Then we have got the states like West Bengal. So what we see is that there is a significant variation in, if we talk about the healthcare apparatus regionally. Next is the rural populations. Now, what we see is that because they have to travel a long distance, and because there is lack of availability of specialist doctors in the rural areas, there is delayed diagnosis and poor health outcomes of the rural population. Next is there is significant gap in the doctor-patient ratio. What we see is that the WHO prescribes there has to be 1:1100 doctors, that is one doctor per 1100 population. But what we see is in India, we have got around 1:10,000. That is one government doctor per 10,000 of the population. Now, this is abysmally low, right? Also, what we see is that there is skewed distribution. What do you mean by that? That there is a dominance or a majority of these doctors in the urban areas, right? And we don't have the adequate number of doctors in the rural areas. Now, this also leads to the rural-urban disparity. Next is there has been a continuous rise of non-communicable diseases. Now, this is not just an urban phenomena. It is also percolating in the rural areas. So that is also leading to greater health issues among the rural population. Next is inefficiencies and misuse of fund. See, in India, what we follow is a top-down approach, where the central government gives fund to the state government and then state government gives to the different district hospitals. So there is the siphoning of funds. That is, funds are being misutilized or they are being misused. And mostly there is the mismanagement or corruption which is involved. Next, what we see is the CAG reports. The CAG report has also highlighted this, that there is inadequate efficiency or inadequate usage of funds which are being given to the lower governments, that is the state governments or the district administration. Next, what we have is the human resource constraints. So there is actually inadequate number of doctors or healthcare professionals, be it the nursing staff, be it the doctors, be it the specialty doctors. So moreover, what we see is that there is a prevalence of quacks in rural areas, that is those doctors who are actually not having the requisite degree or who are not actually entitled to practice medicine, right? So this actually compromises the quality of the healthcare which is being provided, and it leads to longer waiting times. Again, the WHO has recommended an specific doctor-patient ratio. It has recommended specific health sort of regulations which are to be followed. So we have got the international healthcare regulations which are actually prescribed by the WHO. So those are actually not being implemented in letter and spirit. Now, what we see is there has to be a way forward in order to make sure that we have got a robust public healthcare apparatus. The first is investing in rural healthcare infrastructure. This is very important. So what we see is that we already have got adequate number of doctors in the urban areas. Moreover, in the cities, different municipal governments, they're also providing the healthcare facilities. And we have got the central government or the state government, which is also establishing different types of clinics. For example, we have got the mohalla clinics, right? But there is the dearth of resources, dearth of adequate healthcare provisioning in the rural areas. So there needs to be a proper investment. Then incentives to retain healthcare professionals. Now, this is very important. We have got some of the doctors from the very reputed colleges in the country. So we have got people who pass out their MBBS, but because of the good opportunities, very good opportunities which are provided in the different countries or in the urban areas, they shift to urban areas or they either migrate out of India. So we need to give adequate incentives to such type of people so that they can also, for a particular time period, they can also live in the rural areas and serve that particular population. Then there needs to be robust monitoring systems. We need to make sure that if you are giving adequate funds, there has to be proper public fund management system with respect to the healthcare provisioning. So the fund usage has to be overseen by different entities, and we need to make sure that there is proper accountability framework which is included in the management system. Next, there's a need for enhanced disease surveillance mechanisms. Now, what we need to keep in mind is that, as we already saw in the pandemics, so there has to be a proper framework where the disease reporting is done quickly. It is done on a prompt basis so that we have got adequate systems in place at the sub-center level, at the community health center, at the district hospital level, so that the adequate actions can be taken, and then we can actually have a preventive mechanism in place. Next, investments in preventive healthcare. Now, this is very important. We need to adequately invest in the preventive healthcare. So as the non-communicable diseases, as the risk and the number of non-communicable diseases, the population being affected, it is increasing. We need to have a focus on the preventive healthcare. So we have got the Eat Right movement, or we have got the adequate emphasis on having rich millets-based sources, right? So we need to incorporate such things in our diet so that there is a sort of healthy diet, and we can ensure that the population is not affected because of these NCDs risks. So what we see is that definitely the government has done a lot of work when we talk about the public expenditure on the health, but significant improvements need to be made, especially in the rural healthcare setup, right? So that we can have a proper, robust overall public healthcare system in India. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a question. So the question says, the provisioning of public healthcare in India has significantly improved both qualitatively and quantitatively. However, there still exists some serious challenges. In this context, highlight the measures required to make the public healthcare apparatus more strengthened. So do write a particular answer in this question. Now, the next topic is with respect to the tribal vulnerability. So what we have recently seen is that the two tribals were beaten to death in Gujarat. Now this points towards the issue of tribal vulnerability. So we'll see how in India we have the deeming of a particular community as a tribe, a scheduled tribe. What are the issues with respect to them and what should be the way forward? Now this is with respect to GS2, vulnerable sections and government interventions. Now, if we go into the tribes, the definition of the tribes, what we see is that historically there have been some communities in India which have faced a lot of marginalization, which have faced a lot of exploitation in terms of economic exploitation, social exploitation, educational exploitation, and that is primarily because of their primitive agriculture practices, their lack of infrastructure and geographical isolation. Now this was taken into consideration by the constitution makers, and therefore they actually decided that some communities would be deemed as scheduled tribes. So we have got in the constitution some of the communities which are deemed as scheduled tribes. So we have got article 342 which clearly mentions about these scheduled tribes. Now we have article 342 subclause 1 which clearly states that the President of India, with respect to a particular state or a union territory, with the consultation of the governor, may specify a particular tribe or a community of tribes as a scheduled tribe with respect to that particular state or union territory. Then we have got article 342 subclause 2 which says that the parliament may by law include in or exclude from the list of the scheduled tribes which is actually prescribed in the article 342 subclause 1. So these are the two very important articles. Now, is there a criteria for specification of a community as a ST? Well, the constitution is silent with respect to the criteria, what should be the criteria for actually deeming a particular community as a scheduled tribe or not. But what we see is that there are specific traits with respect to a particular community which actually deem it fit for actually declaring it as a scheduled tribe. For example, the traits can be the primitiveness, geographical isolation, shyness and social, educational or economic backwardness. Now, the definition of this particular scheduled tribes, we actually get it from the census of 1931. So it is on the basis of the definition which is provided in the census of 1931 that we actually deem a particular community as the scheduled tribe community. Now, if we go into the demographics, what we see is that the SC population in India, it is approximately 8.6% of the total population. Now, this is in accordance to the 2011 census. Now, this corresponds to almost 10.4 crores of the STs, right? Next, what we have is that in India, we have almost 730 scheduled tribes spread all over the country. Now, if we talk about the geographical expanse, you can just see that we have got the central belt of India, that is which comprises the state of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and also the state of Odisha, right? Then we have got the northeastern part, which has a dominance of the tribals, and then we have got the union territory of Ladakh, which has all the population as the tribals. So this is how it is geographically actually distributed. Now, what are the issues with respect to the tribals in the country? The first and foremost is the land alienation and displacement. So we have got a particular NGO, that is the Land Rights Alliance, which actually says that since 1951, almost 6.6 million of tribals have been displaced from their particular locations. Now, this is a very huge number. Now, what it leads to is the loss of livelihoods. Now, please understand that these tribals, they actually practice very crude forms of livelihoods. For example, hunting, gathering. Once you are making these people displaced, once you are displacing them from their locations, it leads to the loss of livelihoods. Then it also leads to the environmental degradation. How? These tribals, they live with nature. That is, they adopt nature-based solutions. And once you remove these tribals, you displace them. Now, obviously, once you're displacing, you are actually displacing for a particular purpose, maybe for mining, maybe for other developmental related projects. Now, that actually compromises the environment. So it leads to environmental degradation. Next, we have got social disposition. So what we see is that these forests, the places in which these tribal live, they have a cultural identity associated with them. Now, once you actually displace them, it leads to this social disposition of these tribals. Next, we have got lack of basic amenities and infrastructure. So the very first is the health issues. Now, if I were to give you a data, so according to the census of 2011, it says that only 8.6% of the tribal households have a piped water supply connection. Rest don't even have that. So there are issues with respect to health. There is inadequate water, sanitation and hygiene facilities which is there with these people, with the tribals. Then there is the issue of limited education. See, they mostly live in the tribal areas where we don't have the provisioning, adequate provisioning of the educational facilities. Now, this obviously leads to lower literacy levels. Then poor healthcare access. We don't have adequate healthcare facilities in these areas. So obviously it compromises the health aspect of these people. Next, exploitation and marginalization. What we have seen is that according to the NCRB data, National Crime Records Bureau, there has been an increasing instance of crimes against these scheduled tribes, especially in these pocketed areas which are deep inside the forests. Now, what we see is that these tribal groups, they are vulnerable to trafficking, mostly the women and children. So they are obviously, in many cases, they are also sexually exploited. Then we have the issue of debt bondage. Now, what we see is that these tribal people, they fall trapped to the money lenders, and then it ultimately leads to debt bondage. Then there is social exclusion. Now, please understand that once you have got these people who are actually displaced, and once they come to the urban areas, there is a sense of prejudice, there is a sense of discrimination against these people, and this leads to their disintegration with the rest of the society. It is very hard for them to incorporate or to include themselves in the mainstream society. Then there is resource depletion and environment degradation. So what we see is that once you displace these people, as we just told, that once you displace these people actually live with the nature, and they have got nature-based solutions. So once you remove them, once you displace them, that leads to the degradation and the loss of biodiversity. It also leads to livelihood insecurity. See, they are dependent on very crude employment options. For example, we have got hunting, gathering, or shifting cultivation, but they don't have even the adequate education levels or vocational training to perform other jobs. So thereby it leads to livelihood insecurity. Then we have got inadequate governance and representation. See, there is a lack of voice. So in the 17th Lok Sabha, we only had 47 scheduled members from the scheduled tribe out of the 543, right? So what we are trying to say is that if you don't have adequate number of people representing your voice, that would obviously lead to inadequate participation in the decision making, right? Next, we have got ineffective implementation of policies. See, the mainstream society that is not aware about the cultural and traditions of these tribals. So it leads to ineffective implementation of the policies. So what we see is that these are some of the issues which these tribals suffer from. Now, what have been the government interventions? The first and foremost is the constitutional safeguard in terms of the 5th schedule and 6th schedule. So the 5th schedule provides for the administration and control of the scheduled tribes and scheduled areas. And then we have got the 6th schedule, which provides for the administration of the scheduled tribes in particular states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram, right? So we have got adequate safeguards for them, constitutional safeguards which are provided specifically, explicitly in the constitution. Then we have got the special component plans and tribal sub-plans. See, in the budget of the central government and different state government, we have a specific portion which is earmarked for these tribal groups, right? And that is where these funds are spent on the development, on the growth and development of these tribal groups. Next, we have got the educational development schemes like the Eklave model residential schools. Now, these are the specific schools which provide the educational attainment to these tribal groups. And then we have got specific scholarships which are aimed to enhance the educational outcomes of these people. Then economic development initiatives like Tribal Cooperative Marketing and Development Federation of India. So we have got TriFed. Now this actually focuses upon the branding and marketing of the tribal products, right? Next, we have got the skill development programs. So we have got some of the very important skill development program which try to emphasize on the vocational aspect so that these people can have adequate skills and then they can have adequate livelihood options. Then land rights and forest management. So we have got the very important Forest Rights Act. Now this gives ownership rights to these tribal people or other forest dwellers, right? And therefore it actually empowers them. Now, what should be the ways to reduce the tribal vulnerability and promote their development? The first and foremost is strengthening of existing laws. See, what we see is that there is no dearth of laws in India. We have got the Forest Right Act, we have got the other laws, for example, the PISA, panchayat extension to scheduled areas. So there is no dearth of laws. What matters is their adequate sort of implementation, making sure that they are implemented in letter and spirit. Next is community driven planning. See, we need to actually get rid of the top-down approach. There has to be a bottom-up approach where the needs and aspirations of the people on the ground, they are taken into consideration. Next is the focus on sustainable livelihoods. We should try to give these people, we should try to train these people in those sort of areas where those livelihood options are actually in line with their traditions and knowledge. For example, organic farming, for example, ecotourism. So they can actually be trained in such areas. Next is improve infrastructure and quality of education. Now, this is very important. Also, what we need to focus upon is integrating the vocational aspect, right? So that they have got adequate skills and they can practice such vocations. Next, minimizing their displacement. We have got a lot of projects, developmental projects, which are going on in the tribal areas. What needs to be kept in mind is that this displacement should be avoided. And if you are even displacing them, then we need to have proper rehabilitation mechanism. And along with the rehabilitation mechanism, we need to compensate them monetarily and also in terms of providing them with adequate skills, vocational skills. Then there needs to be transparency in the allocation and utilization of funds. Now, this is very important. We have got schemes, we have got numerous schemes, but those schemes are not reaching on the ground, primarily because of the mismanagement and the corruption which is involved. So there has to be a proper transparency in the allocation of the funding and making sure that we have got foolproof schemes for these particular segment. So what we see is that definitely these tribals, they have given a lot of, they're a resource of a very important traditional knowledge. So what we need to make sure is that their vulnerabilities are reduced and then they are integrated into the mainstream society, and therefore we can have proper inclusive growth. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have got a question. So the question says, the tribes in India suffer from various forms of deprivation and marginalization. Elaborate. Also highlight the measures taken by the government for their growth and development. So do write a particular answer on this question. Now, the next topic is with respect to the Coffee Board of India. So the Coffee Board of India has indicated that there would be lower production of coffee in the year 2024-25, primarily because of the high temperature, heavy rainfall and landslides in the coffee heartlands of the country. Now, this is with respect to GS2 statutory bodies and GS3 agriculture. Now, let's first talk about the coffee plant. Now, this coffee, it is indigenous to the Abyssinia plateau, that is Ethiopia. And it was in the 11th century that it was actually taken to Arabia, right? So do remember this. Now, it was from Arabia in 17th century that we had a particular person, Baba Budangiri. Now, he actually took these seeds from Arabia and came to India. And over here, he planted these seeds in a particular area, which are now known as the Baba Budan Hills in Karnataka. Right. Now, these coffee plants, it requires hot and humid climate. So around a temperature range from 15 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius. And it requires heavy rainfall, that is from 150 centimeters to 250 centimeters. So do remember. But what you need to keep in mind is that it does not tolerate frost, snowfall or high temperature. And it is generally grown under shady trees. It requires a shady in a specific time period. Then it requires dry weather during the times of ripening of the seeds, right? And it is also grown on the hill slopes, that is ranging where the slope ranges from 600 meters till 1600 meters. So do remember this. Now, it requires well-drained soil with rich humus. There are some traditional areas where the coffee is grown. So we have got, just look at this map. So we have got some traditional areas as Karnataka, we have got Kerala, and we have got Tamil Nadu. Now, these are the traditional coffee growing areas. Then we have got some non-traditional areas as Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Tripura, Assam, right? So overall, we have got two varieties. We have got the two varieties of coffee. First is Arabica and the second is Robusta. Now, this coffee, Arabica, what you need to keep in mind is that it is mild in nature. It is not that strong, but it has more of aroma. That is the reason it has a greater market value. On the other hand, Robusta is something which is very strong, right? And it is usually for used for making blends, right? So that is what you need to keep in mind. So we have got Karnataka at number 1 position, then Kerala, then Tamil Nadu. Now, if we talk about the Coffee Board of India, what you need to keep in mind is that it is a statutory organization and it was formed under the Coffee Act of 1942. It is under the overall jurisdiction of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India, and the board comprises of 33 members, including a particular person as chairman who acts as the chief executive. The board is in Bangalore. The office is located in Bangalore. Now, this particular Coffee Board of India, it acts as a friend, philosopher and guide to these coffee planters, and also so that it can focus upon the marketing, right? So we have got the focus areas as research, extension, development, market intelligence, external and internal promotion for the coffee, making sure that India has adequate focus on the coffee production, making sure that adequate facilities are provided to the exporters, and making sure that we have got a blooming coffee market in the country. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a prelims question. The question says, though coffee and tea both are cultivated on the hill slopes, there is some difference between them regarding their cultivation. In this context, consider the following statements. The first is, coffee plant requires a hot and humid climate of tropical areas, whereas tea can be cultivated in both tropical and subtropical areas. Coffee is propagated by seeds, but tea is propagated by stem cuttings only. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? One only, two only, both one and two, or neither one and two? Let me see who answers in the comment section. Now, the next topic is with respect to the Central Drugs Standards Control Organization and the Drug Controller General of India. So the government of India has taken a major sort of decision where it has decided to waive the requirement for the clinical trials of particular drugs in India. Those drugs which have already got the approval in specific markets, that is the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, Australia, Canada, or the European Union. Now, this is going to increase the affordability of drugs in the country, these specific drugs, and the expanse of these drugs in the country. Therefore, it becomes important to study about these two bodies, that is the Central Drugs Standards Control Organization and the Drug Controller General of India. Now, see, we have got a specific statutory law, and that is the Drugs and Cosmetics Acts of 1940. Now, according to this particular act, what we see is that the regulation of the manufacture, sale and distribution of the drugs, it is primarily lies in the jurisdiction of the state authorities. Whereas when we talk about the approval of the new drugs or the clinical trials or the standards for the drugs or the quality of the imported drugs, the coordination among different state drug control organization, it actually lies with the central authority. So there is a clear demarcation of responsibilities when we talk about the drug regulation in the country, right? Now, we have got the Central Drugs and Standards Control Organization. Now, this is the central drug authority for discharging functions assigned to the central government under the Drugs and Cosmetic Acts. It has some of the very specific functions. So the functions of CDSCO are, first, it approval of the new drugs and clinical trials. Next, import registration and licensing. So whenever you have got particular drugs which are imported from outside, you need license from the CDSCO. Then license approving for blood banks, LPVs, vaccines, rDNA products, and some other medical devices. So for all these products and services, you require the license from the CDSCO. Then amendments to the Drugs and Cosmetic Acts, banning of drugs and cosmetics, then grant of test license, person license, no objection certificates for exports, testing of new drugs, oversight and market surveillance through inspectorate of center over and above the state authority. So these are the specific functions which are performed by the Central Drugs Standards Control Organization. Now, this works under the overall jurisdiction of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. We have a particular position, that is the Drugs Controller General of India, who heads the CDSCO. So just remember that. It is responsible for the approval of licenses of specified categories of drugs such as bloods and blood products, intravenous fluids, vaccines and sera, right? So what you need to keep in mind is that this particular DCGI, he actually heads the Central Drugs and Standards Control Organization. That is what you need to know about this particular body. Now, coming to the Prelims Snippets section, we have got the first topic as International Hydrographic Organization. Now, what is actually hydrography? See, hydrography is the study of the subsurface terrain, right? So as to see that what kind of resources are available and how well we can sustainably exploit those resources, right? Now, this particular organization, that is International Hydrographic Organization, it was established in the year 1921. So it's a very old organization, prominent entity focused upon addressing the various aspects of marine life. So it is primarily responsible for gathering the hydrographic data, right? It works to ensure that all the world's seas, oceans and navigable waters are surveyed and charted, thereby supporting the safety of navigation and the protection of the marine environment. Next, it also coordinates the activities of the National Hydrographic Offices. So we have got national, oceanographic and hydrographic offices in different countries. So it is the task of this international organization to coordinate with such national offices and sets the standards in order to promote uniformity in nautical charts and documents. Next, it also issues survey best practices and provides guidelines to maximize the use of hydrographic information. The office of this organization, it is based in Monaco. So just remember this. This is how we have got the subsea surface sort of examination which is done in the hydrography. Next, we have the Wrestling Federation of India. So the Wrestling Federation of India, it's a governing body of wrestling in India. Now, this is headquartered in New Delhi. Now, this body, this particular federation, it is recognized by the government of India and the Indian Olympic Association. What you need to keep in mind is that this particular body, it organizes various national and international wrestling events such as Pro Wrestling League, the National Wrestling Championship, and the Asian Championship. The the Wrestling Federation of India also supports and trains Indian wrestlers who participate in the Olympic Games. This becomes important because the WFI was in news in the context of Indian participants who participated in the wrestling at the Olympics, right? Next, we have got the International Oceanographic Commission of the UNESCO. So this was established in the year 1960. Now, this is a body with functional autonomy under the UNESCO, and it is the only competent organization for marine science within the United Nations system. So do remember that IOC is a part of the UNESCO, and it is the only competent body for the marine sciences. Now, this promotes the international cooperation and coordinates in different programs in research, services, and capacity building in the domain of ocean and coastal areas. Next, it also focuses upon the improved management and sustainable development and protection of the marine environment and in the decision-making process of the different member states. So that is where it focuses upon making sure that we have got different member states and they collaborate in a way so that we can sustainably exploit the resources of the ocean and ensure inclusive growth. Then the IOC is recognized through the United Nations Convention of the Law of Sea as a competent international organization in the field of marine scientific research and transfer of marine technology. So overall, the objective of this particular body is to make sure that there is scientific progress in this particular domain, that is oceanography, and making sure that these technologies are transferred to different countries, right, for making sustainable utilization of different ocean resources. Next, we have got the National Center for Polar and Oceanic Research. Now, this was initially established as an autonomous research and development institution under the Ministry of Earth Sciences. Now, this becomes very important. Do remember the ministry, that it works under the overall jurisdiction of Ministry of Earth Sciences. And NCPOR, it is the India's premier research and development institution responsible for countries' research activities in the polar and southern ocean realms. So you already are aware that we have got, for example, some of the very important stations, Himadri in Arctic, or we have got Bharti, or other stations in Antarctica, right? So it is the NCPOR which actually manages such stations. It is a nodal agency for planning, promotion, coordination, and execution of the entire gamut of the polar and southern ocean research in the country, as well as for the associated logistics activity. So it manages all the things, starting from the very logistics, making sure that we have got adequate sort of research scientists in place and their transfer or their sort of transportation to these research stations for specific research projects, right? Now, this is located in the state of Goa. So that is what you need to remember about the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research. So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed the session. All the best. Thank you.